They thought selling her would save them. They thought the small Omega with trembling hands and a voice that barely rose above a whisper was nothing more than a bargaining chip, a peace offering, a sacrifice to appease the monster who had conquered their lands and burned their defenses to ash. They were wrong. 4 months from this moment, Alara Moonstone would stand in the very throne room where she had once knelt in chains. Silver would crown her head instead of iron binding her wrists. The elders who had
We
sold
cannot
her
delay
would
any
kneel at her
longer.
feet,
I understand.
trembling
What is
just
your
as she
plan?
had trembled, and she would speak their sentence with a voice that carried the weight of a queen. But that transformation, that impossible rise from prisoner to sovereign, would cost her everything she thought she knew about strength, about survival, about the difference between chains that bind the body and chains that bind the soul. This is where it began, in humiliation, in snow, in blood. The village square was packed with bodies. Over 200 wolves stood shoulder to shoulder in the bitter cold of early winter, their breath forming clouds in the freezing air. They had gathered not to celebrate, not to mourn, but to witness, to watch as one of their own was offered up like a lamb to slaughter. Alara stood at the center of the square, her bare feet already numb against the frozen cobblestones. They had taken her shoes during the night, taken her coat, left her in nothing but a thin dress that did nothing to shield her from the wind that cut through the square like a blade. She was small. Even for an Omega, she was small, barely 5 feet and 2 inches thin from years of rationing, of giving her portions to younger children, of making herself as invisible as possible in a pack that valued strength above all else. Her white gold hair hung loose and tangled down her back. No one had allowed her time to braid it to make herself presentable. They wanted her to look broken, wanted her to appear as worthless as they claimed she was. Elder Whitmore stood on the raised platform at the north end of the square. He was tall for his age, still broad across the shoulders despite the silver in his beard. His voice carried across the gathered crowd with the authority of a man who had led this pack for 30 years. "We stand here today." He began, his words echoing off the stone buildings that surrounded the square, "to fulfill the terms of the treaty that saved our people from total annihilation." Alara kept her eyes on the ground. She had learned long ago that meeting the eyes of her betters only brought more pain, more punishment, more reminders that she was less than the dirt beneath their feet. King Kale Nightshade Alpha of the Northern Territories, conqueror of the Seven Peaks, has demanded tribute as the price of our survival. The crowd murmured, some in agreement, others in what might have been pity if wolves like these were capable of such an emotion. He has demanded an Omega bride, untouched, unbonded, a symbol of our submission to his rule. Elder Whitmore's gaze fell on Alara and something flickered in his eyes. Was it guilt, shame, or simply the cold calculation of a man doing what needed to be done to protect the many at the expense of the one? Alara Moonstone has been chosen for this honor. Honor. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. This was not honor. This was execution by another name. Everyone in this square knew what happened to Omegas who were sent to the Northern King. They had all heard the stories. 6 mates in 200 years, and every single one of them dead within months of their claiming. Some said he worked them to death. Others whispered darker things, that he was cursed, that any Omega who tried to bear his child would die, screaming that the palace was haunted by the ghosts of those who had failed to give him an heir. Alara had lost her father to KL Nightshade's war, lost him in the final battle that had ended with their pack's surrender. She could still remember the day they brought his body back, could still see the way her mother had collapsed beside him, grief transforming her face into something ancient and terrible. Her mother had followed her father into death 3 months later. The healer said it was fever. Alara knew better. It was a broken heart. It was the weight of a world that had taken everything and given nothing in return. And now they were taking Alara too. "Approach," Elder Whitmore commanded. Alara's legs shook as she forced herself to move forward. Each step felt like walking through deep water. The crowd parted before her, and she could feel their eyes on her skin like brands. Some of those eyes held pity. Most held nothing but relief that it was her and not their daughters, their sisters, their mates standing in the center of this square. When she reached the platform, she sank to her knees without being told. The stones were ice against her skin. She clasped her hands in front of her, tried to keep them from trembling, and failed. "This Omega," Elder Whitmore continued, his voice ringing out across the silent square, "is broken. She cannot shift. She cannot fight. She is worthless to this pack in every way that matters." Each word was a stone thrown at her heart. Broken, worthless, useless. She had heard them all before, but hearing them spoken aloud in front of everyone she had ever known made them cut deeper than any blade. But perhaps, the elder said, and something in his tone made Alara's skin crawl, she will be of use to the king. Perhaps her weakness will please him. Perhaps her inability to shift will make her easier to control. Laughter rippled through the crowd, cruel laughter that made Alara want to curl into herself and disappear. Your father died for nothing, a voice called out from somewhere in the gathered wolves. He fought like a fool and died like a dog, and you're not even worth the dirt they buried him in. More laughter, louder now. Alara bit down on the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste blood. She would not cry, would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break completely. She had survived 19 years in this pack, survived the whispers and the cruelty and the casual violence that came with being the weakest member of a group that worships strength. She would survive this too, even if survival meant being sent to her death. Elder Whitmore raised his hand and the crowd fell silent once more. The king's guards will arrive before nightfall. They will take this Omega to the northern palace where she will fulfill her purpose as a treaty bride. He gestured and two younger wolves stepped forward. Alara recognized them, Garrett and Thomas. They had trained with her father once, had eaten at their table, had called themselves friends. Now they carried iron chains. The metal was cold enough to burn as they wrapped the shackles around her wrists, heavy enough that her arms dropped under the weight, pulling her shoulders down until she was hunched like an old woman. They attached a collar next, thick iron that pressed against her throat and made each breath feel like an effort. Let this serve as a reminder, Elder Whitmore announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the square, of the price of defeat. Let this Omega's sacrifice remind us all that survival requires sacrifice, that peace requires submission. He looked down at Alara, and for just a moment his expression softened. For just a heartbeat, she thought she saw regret in his eyes. Then it was gone. Take her to the holding cell. The king's guards will collect their prize when they arrive. Garrett and Thomas hauled her to her feet. The chains rattled as she stumbled, her numb feet struggling to find purchase on the frozen stones. The crowd began to disperse, some quickly eager to return to the warmth of their homes, others more slowly lingering to get one last look at the Omega who would be gone before morning. One woman, old and bent with age, stepped forward as they dragged Alara past. She pressed something into Alara's chained hands, a scrap of cloth, worn soft with age and use. Your mother would be proud, the woman whispered, her voice so low that only Alara could hear. You're stronger than they know. Then she was gone, melting back into the crowd before anyone could see what she had done. Alara clutched the cloth as they pulled her across the square. It was warm from the old woman's pocket, and it smelled faintly of lavender and pine, the same scent her mother used to wear. The holding cell was a stone room beneath the elder's house. No windows, no light except for the single torch that Garrett hung on a hook outside the iron-barred door. They shoved her inside. She fell hard, her chained hands unable to break her fall. Her shoulder struck the stone floor and pain exploded through her arm. The door clanged shut. A lock turned. Footsteps retreated up the stairs. And then there was only silence and darkness and cold. Alara pushed herself into a sitting position, her shoulder throbbing with each heartbeat. She leaned back against the stone wall and finally allowed herself to do what she had forbidden herself to do in the square. She cried. Not loud sobbing cries. Those would only bring the guards back, would only give them more proof of her weakness. Instead, she let silent tears stream down her face, let them drip onto the chains at her wrists, let herself grieve for the life she would never have. She was 19 years old. She should have had decades ahead of her. Should have found a kind mate, raised children, lived to see her hair turn silver. Instead, she would be dead before spring. The hours passed slowly in that dark cell. Alara had no way to mark the time except by the changing of the guards. Garrett and Thomas were replaced by others. Those others were replaced in turn. Night fell. The temperature dropped even further. Alara's thin dress did nothing to protect her from the cold that seeped up through the stone floor and down from the stone ceiling. She pulled the scrap of cloth from where she had hidden it in her sleeve. In the dim light from the torch in the corridor, she could just make out the pattern embroidered on it. Moonflowers, her mother's favorite. Her mother had been a healer, the best in the pack. She had known every herb, every remedy, every way to coax broken bodies back to health. She had tried to teach Alara, but Alara had been too young, too distracted by dreams of one day being strong enough to shift to fight to be valued. Now those lessons were all she had left of her mother. Fragments of knowledge about which plants could stop bleeding, which could ease pain, which could fight infection. Useless knowledge for a girl who was about to die. Or so she thought. The guards came for her as darkness gave way to the gray light of pre-dawn. 6 of them. Not wolves from her pack, but outsiders. Soldiers wearing the black and silver of the Northern Territories. One of them unlocked the cell door. The other stood ready, hands on the hilts of their swords as if Alara posed some kind of threat, as if a chained Omega who could barely stand was dangerous. "On your feet," the lead guard commanded. His voice was flat professional, completely devoid of emotion. Alara struggled to obey. Her legs had gone numb hours ago. The chains were so heavy. But she managed somehow to force herself upright. They led her out of the cell, up the stairs, out into the freezing morning air. A wagon waited in the square. Wooden sides, iron-barred windows, a cage on wheels. They loaded her into it like cargo, slammed the door shut, locked it with a heavy padlock. Elder Whitmore stood nearby watching. His face was impassive, but Alara thought she saw his hands tremble slightly before he clasped them behind his back. "The treaty is fulfilled," he said to the lead guard. "The Omega is yours. Take her to your king." The guard nodded, mounted his horse, signaled to the others. The wagon lurched into motion. Alara grabbed the bars to keep from falling as they rolled out of the village square down the main road toward the mountain pass that would take them north, toward the palace, toward King KL Nightshade, toward her death. She looked back once, saw the village growing smaller behind them, saw the few wolves who had gathered to watch her departure. None of them raised a hand in farewell. None of them called out a blessing or a prayer. They had already forgotten her. She turned away from them and faced forward. If she was going to die, she would at least do it with her eyes open, would at least face whatever came with the same stubborn strength that had kept her alive this long. The journey north should have taken 2 days. It took 4. The first day was cold but clear. The wagon rolled through familiar territory past farms Alara recognized, past the forest where she had gathered herbs with her mother. The second day brought them into the mountains. The road became steeper, more treacherous. Snow began to fall in the afternoon light, at first, then heavier as evening approached. By the third day, they were trapped in a blizzard. Alara had never seen snow like this. It came down so thick that she could barely see the guard riding directly beside her wagon. The wind howled through the bars of her cage, stealing what little warmth her body still held. The guards were struggling. Their horses fought every step, terrified by the wind and the cold, and the way the road seemed to disappear beneath the drifting snow. Alara heard them arguing, heard one voice rise above the wind. "We should turn back, wait out the storm in the valley. The king expects us before the new moon. We're already delayed. We'll all be dead if we keep pushing forward in this." More arguing, heated words that Alara couldn't quite make out over the screaming wind. Then silence. Then the wagon lurched to a stop. Alara peered through the bars, trying to see what was happening. The snow was so thick now that she could barely make out shapes. Horses, men, movement. Then she heard it. A sound that made her blood run cold. Howls. Distant at first, then closer. Wild wolves, not pack wolves. The kind that lived in these mountains and hunted anything foolish enough to venture into their territory during a storm. The guards began shouting. Alara heard steel leaving sheaths, heard horses screaming in fear. Then she heard something worse. The lead guard's voice, cold and calculating, cutting through the chaos. "Leave the Omega. She'll slow us down." "What? You heard me? Unlock the wagon, leave her here. The wolves will find her before she freezes. Either way, she's dead. At least this way we might survive to report back. But the king will understand that we did what we had to do to survive. Now unlock the damn cage before those wolves get any closer." Footsteps approached through the snow. A key rattled in the lock. The cage door swung open. Hands grabbed Alara and hauled her out into the blizzard. She fell into snow that came up to her knees. The cold was so intense it felt like fire. "I'm sorry," one of the younger guards whispered as he worked at the lock on her chains. "Orders are orders." The shackles fell away from her wrists. The collar came off her throat. For the first time in days, she was free, and utterly, completely alone. The guards mounted their horses, turned south, disappeared into the white wall of falling snow within seconds. Alara stood in the middle of the mountain road wearing nothing but a thin dress with no food, no water, no shelter, and the sounds of hunting wolves growing closer by the moment. She was going to die here. The thought should have terrified her, should have sent her to her knees in despair. Instead, something else rose up inside her, something hard and bright and burning. Anger. She had survived 19 years of cruelty and neglect, had survived losing both her parents, had survived the humiliation in the square and days in that freezing cage. She had not survived all of that just to die alone in the snow because some cowardly guards decided she was expendable. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory clear, as if she were standing right beside Alara. "When you're lost in the wilderness, when everything seems hopeless, Remember this. Nature provides for those who know where to look. The same plants that can kill can also heal. The same cold that can freeze can also preserve. Knowledge is survival, my daughter, and you have more knowledge than you know. Allura closed her eyes, took a breath, forced her panic down and her thinking mind up. She needed shelter. Needed it now before the cold stole what remained of her strength. She looked around, squinting against the driving snow. There, to the east, a darker shadow against the white. Rocks, maybe an overhang, maybe a cave. She pushed through the snow, toward it. Each step was agony. Her feet were already going numb. Her hands felt like blocks of ice. But she kept moving. The shadow resolved into a rocky outcropping. Beneath it, carved into the mountainside by wind and time, was a shallow cave. Not deep, not warm, but out of the wind. Alara stumbled inside and collapsed against the back wall. She had shelter. Barely. But it was something. Now she needed fire. She forced herself back to her feet, forced herself back out into the storm. Scoured the area around the cave until she found what she was looking for. A pine tree, its lower branches thick with needles and protected from the worst of the snow by the rocks above. She tore off handfuls of the driest needles she could find, grabbed small twigs from beneath the tree where they had been shielded from the wet, collected everything into her arms, and staggered back to the cave. The needles would burn fast and hot if she could get them lit. The twigs would sustain the flame long enough to dry out larger wood, but she had no flint, no steel, no way to create spark. She sat in the cave staring at the pile of needles and twigs and felt despair trying to creep back in. Then she remembered. The chains. The guards had left them lying in the snow where they had fallen. Alara crawled back out into the storm, found the chains half buried already, grabbed them and dragged them back to her cave. Iron and stone. Strike them together hard enough and they would create sparks. It took 37 tries. She counted each one as her hands grew more numb, as her fingers became so cold they could barely grip the chain. On the 38th strike, a spark caught. It was tiny, barely there, but it was enough. Ilara cupped her hands around the smoking pine needles, blew on them gently, watched as the spark became an ember, as the ember became flame. Light bloomed in the cave. Heat followed. She fed the fire carefully, added twigs, then larger sticks, built it slowly until she had a real blaze going. The warmth was almost painful as it started to seep back into her frozen body, but it was the most beautiful pain she had ever felt. She was alive. Against all odds, despite everything, she was still alive. The storm raged outside for another full day and night. Alara tended her fire, ventured out only when absolutely necessary to gather more wood, more pine needles for insulation. She pulled the scrap of cloth from her sleeve, the moonflower embroidery her mother had made, and pressed it to her heart. Thank you, she thought. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for giving me the knowledge I needed to survive. On the second morning, the storm finally broke. Alara emerged from her cave into a world transformed. Everything was white, pristine, beautiful in a way that would have been breathtaking if she weren't half dead from cold and hunger. She knew she couldn't stay here. The wild wolves would return. She had no food. And the northern palace was still somewhere ahead, though she had no idea how far. But she was free. The guards had abandoned her. No one knew where she was. She could go anywhere, could disappear into these mountains and never be found. The thought tempted her for about 3 seconds. Then she dismissed it. She would not survive long alone in these mountains. And even if she did, what kind of life would that be hiding? Running. Always afraid. No, if she was going to live, she would live on her own terms. And that meant finishing this journey, meeting this king who had conquered her people and demanded tribute, meeting him not as a prisoner, but as a survivor. She gathered what she could, wrapped herself in pine boughs for extra insulation, covered her feet with strips torn from the bottom of her dress and stuffed with moss for warmth. Then she started walking north. The road was buried under snow, but she could follow the shape of it, could see where the trees had been cleared to make passage. She walked all day. When exhaustion threatened to drop her in the snow, she kept walking. When hunger made her dizzy, she chewed on pine needles for the little bit of nutrition they provided. She had survived the guards' betrayal, had survived the blizzard. She would survive this too. As evening approached, she saw something in the distance, smoke rising into the clear sky. Not from a campfire. Too much smoke for that. A building. Maybe even the palace itself. Alara pushed herself harder. Her vision was starting to blur. Her body was shutting down. She could feel it. But she was so close, just a little farther, just a little more. The trees thinned, the road widened. And there, rising out of the snow, like something from a dream, was a palace carved from black stone and silver. She had made it. She took 2 more steps toward those massive gates. Then her legs gave out. She fell face first into the snow and knew nothing more. She woke to warmth. Real warmth, not the desperate heat of a tiny fire in a cave. The kind of warmth that came from being inside, surrounded by stone walls and proper hearths. Alara opened her eyes slowly, found herself staring up at a ceiling of dark wood and carved beams. She was lying on something soft, a bed with actual blankets. She tried to sit up and pain lanced through every muscle in her body. Easy, a woman's voice. Kind. You've been through quite an ordeal. The guards found you collapsed at the gate 3 hours ago. Alara turned her head, saw a woman of perhaps 40 with gray streaking through her dark hair and gentle brown eyes. She wore the simple dress of a palace servant, but she moved with quiet authority as she checked Alara's pulse and adjusted the blankets. Where Alara's voice came out as a croak. Her throat felt like she had swallowed broken glass. The Northern Palace. You're in the healer's wing. The woman offered her a cup of water. Drink slowly. The water was the best thing Alara had ever tasted. She wanted to gulp it down, but she forced herself to take small sips. The guards told us they were bringing a tribute bride, the woman continued. But they arrived 3 days ago, alone, claimed they lost you in a blizzard. 3 days. She had been missing for 3 days. I'm Helen, the woman said, head healer here at the palace, and you must be Alara Moonstone. Alara nodded weakly. Well, Alara Moonstone, I have to say you're either the luckiest or the most stubborn Omega I've ever met. That blizzard killed 2 experienced hunters. You survived it alone with no supplies and somehow managed to walk 30 miles through snow to get here. I had help, Alara whispered. My mother. She taught me. Helen's expression softened. Your mother was a healer. The best. Then she would be very proud of you right now. The words hit harder than Alara expected. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. Rest, Helen said gently. You're safe here. Whatever happens next, you need to heal first. She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, she said quietly, the king was furious when the guards arrived without you. Furious in a way I've never seen. He had them thrown in the dungeons for abandonment of duty. Been pacing the throne room for 3 days waiting for word. She left before Alara could respond. The king was furious, waiting for word. About her, that made no sense. She was just a treaty bride, a sacrifice. Why would he care if she lived or died? Alara closed her eyes, too tired to make sense of it, too exhausted to do anything but surrender to the warmth and safety and blessed relief of being alive. She slept and dreamed of golden eyes burning in the darkness, watching her, waiting for her, claiming her. When Alara woke again, it was to the sound of raised voices beyond her door. She kept her eyes closed, her breathing steady, listening, a skill learned in childhood. The best way to survive in a pack that saw weakness as sin was to appear asleep, invisible beneath notice, while gathering every scrap of information you could. The king demands to see her, a male voice, deep, authoritative. She's been unconscious for 6 hours. Helen's voice firm despite the clear difference in rank. Her body temperature was so low when they brought her in that I thought we'd lost her. She needs rest, not an audience with her intended mate. The male voice held an edge now, not quite anger, but close. The Omega he's been waiting 200 years to meet. Silence, then Helen again, quieter now. Kale, she's 19 years old. She was abandoned in a blizzard by guards who were supposed to protect her. She walked 30 miles through snow that killed grown warriors. She's exhausted, traumatized, and terrified. Throwing her into the throne room the moment she opens her eyes isn't going to... I know. The male voice again, but different now. Softer, almost gentle. I know, Helen, but I need to see her. Need to know she's real, that she's alive. That after 2 centuries of waiting, the mate bond I felt the moment she crossed into my territory isn't just another cruel trick of fate. Footsteps, pacing. 5 minutes, he said. Just 5 minutes to see her face to confirm what every instinct is screaming at me. Then I'll leave her to rest as long as she needs. A long pause. Then Helen sighed. 5 minutes, but KL, if you do anything to frighten that girl king or not, I will throw you out of this room myself. Understood. The door opened, closed. Footsteps approached the bed where Alara lay. She kept her breathing even, kept her eyes shut, even as every nerve in her body suddenly came alive with awareness. There was someone standing beside her bed. Someone whose presence felt like standing too close to a bonfire. heat and power radiating from him in waves that made her skin prickle with sensation. She heard him breathe, heard the slight hitch in that breath as if he'd been struck by something unexpected. Then so quietly she almost didn't catch it, he whispered, "You're so small." It wasn't an insult, wasn't a judgment. It was wonder, disbelief, as if her size was the most miraculous thing he'd ever encountered. She felt something brush her hair, gentle, reverent, his fingers maybe tucking a strand behind her ear with the kind of care usually reserved for something precious and fragile. "You survived," he whispered. "Everyone said it was impossible. Said no Omega could make it through that storm alone. But you did. You're here. You're real." Another pause. Then, "I'm sorry. Sorry for the guards who failed you. Sorry for the journey that nearly killed you. Sorry for every moment of fear and pain and cold. I swear to you, little one, on my life and my crown and everything I am, no one will ever abandon you again. No one will ever leave you to die. You're safe now. I'll make sure of it." His footsteps retreated, the door opened and closed. Alara opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling, her heart hammering against her ribs. That voice, that presence. King Kale Nightshade, the monster who had conquered her lands and killed her people and demanded tribute in the form of an Omega bride. And he had just stood beside her bed and promised her safety with a tenderness that made her chest ache. She didn't know what to do with that, didn't know how to reconcile the stories she'd been told with the gentle touch of fingers in her hair and a voice that spoke to her like she mattered, like she was precious. Helen returned a few minutes later carrying a tray of food, broth, bread, honey. Simple fare, but the smell made Alara's stomach clench with hunger. "I know you're awake," Helen said without preamble. "Have been for the last 10 minutes at least." Your breathing changed when he entered the room. Alara sat up slowly, accepting the tray with trembling hands. "That was him," she said, not a question. "That was him." Helen settled into a chair beside the bed. "Kale Nightshade, 250 years old, Alpha of the Northern Territories, and apparently your fated mate." The spoon Alara had just picked up clattered against the bowl. "My what?" "Fated mate." Helen leaned forward, her expression serious. "You felt it, didn't you? Even unconscious, even barely alive, you felt something when he walked into this room." Alara wanted to deny it. Wanted to say no, she'd felt nothing, that the sudden awareness and the heat and the way her skin had come alive was just a trick of exhaustion. But she'd never been a good liar. "I don't understand," she whispered instead. "I'm nobody. I'm broken. I can't even shift. How could I possibly be?" "Fate doesn't care about shifting or strength or any of the things our packs value," Helen interrupted gently. "The mate bond chooses what it chooses, and it chose you for him." She reached out and took Alara's hand. "I've known Kale since he was a boy. Watched him grow from a child into a king. Watched him try and fail to find a mate 6 times over 2 centuries. Watched him bury 6 good women who died trying to give him the one thing his curse prevents." "Curse," Alara's voice was barely audible. Helen nodded. "Any child born to him dies within hours. Has been that way for 200 years, ever since his father's death. 6 mates, 6 pregnancies, 6 tiny graves in this royal cemetery." The broth in Alara's stomach turned to lead. "He stopped trying after the last one," Helen continued. "Said he wouldn't risk another woman. Wouldn't watch another mate die in childbirth. Resigned himself to being alone forever." She squeezed Alara's hand. "And then you crossed into his territory 3 days ago. He was in a council meeting when it happened. Stood up in the middle of a sentence and said, 'She's here.' Mora ran to the gates like a man possessed. When the guards arrived without you, I thought he was going to kill them with his bare hands." Alara stared at the older woman, trying to process this information, trying to reconcile it with everything she'd been told, everything she'd believed. "I don't want to be anyone's mate," she finally said. "Fated or not, I just want to go home." Even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. She had no home. Not anymore. The pack that had raised her had sold her like cattle and left her to die. What was there to go back to? Helen's expression was kind but firm. "You're 19 years old, Alara. You've survived things that would have killed wolves twice your age. You have gifts you don't even know about yet. And whether you want it or not, you have a king waiting in the throne room who would burn the world to keep you safe." She stood. "Rest today. Heal. Tomorrow, when you're stronger, you'll meet him properly. And then you can decide what you want to do." She left Alara alone with her thoughts and her half-eaten broth and the terrifying knowledge that her life had just become infinitely more complicated. Tomorrow came faster than Alara wanted. She woke to Helen opening the curtains, letting pale morning light spill into the room. "Time to get up," the healer said cheerfully. "The king has requested your presence in the throne room at midday. That gives us 3 hours to make you presentable." "I don't want to go," Alara said, pulling the blankets over her head. "That's not an option, I'm afraid." Helen tugged the blankets down with surprising strength for a woman her age. "He's been remarkably patient, but his patience has limits, and you've been here for 2 days now." 2 days. She'd lost another full day to unconsciousness and healing sleep. Under Helen's watchful eye, Alara bathed for the first time in what felt like forever. The hot water was absolute bliss against her sore muscles. Her feet, which had been torn and bloody from walking barefoot through snow, had already healed remarkably well. Helen said it was unusual, said most Omegas took weeks to recover from that kind of damage. Alara knew better. Her mother had been a healer, yes, but her mother had also been something more, something the pack had feared and mistrusted, something that Alara had inherited and kept hidden her entire life. She could heal faster than normal wolves, could sense sickness and injury in others, could coax plants to grow stronger and herbs to yield more potent medicine. Her mother had made her swear never to tell anyone, had said that packs feared what they didn't understand, and a female Omega with unexplained gifts would be seen as either a witch or a threat. So Alara had hidden it, had downplayed her healing speeds, and pretended not to notice when she could sense infection before it showed visible symptoms. She would keep hiding it now, at least until she understood what was happening, what the king really wanted from her. Helen dressed her in a simple gown of deep blue wool, soft and warm and far finer than anything Alara had ever worn. She braided Alara's white gold hair and pinned it into a coronet that made her look older, more regal. When Alara looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. "You look like a queen," Helen said softly. "I look like I'm playing dress-up," Alara countered. But there was no heat in her words, just exhaustion and resignation. The walk to the throne room felt like walking to an execution. The palace was massive, built from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Alara followed Helen through corridors lined with silver torches and tapestries, depicting battles and hunts and coronations from centuries past. Servants stopped to stare as they passed. Alara kept her eyes forward, her chin up, refusing to show fear, even as her heart tried to beat its way out of her chest. They reached massive double doors of carved oak and iron. Two guards stood on either side, both well over 6 feet tall, both armed with swords that looked like they could cleave a person in half. One of them knocked. 3 sharp raps. A voice from within, deep and resonant and somehow familiar, even though she'd only heard it once before, whispered at her bedside. "Enter." The doors swung open. The throne room was vast. Columns of black marble stretched toward a ceiling, lost in shadow. Windows of colored glass cast patterns of red and gold and blue across the stone floor. And at the far end, elevated on a dais of 3 steps, sat a throne carved from a single piece of obsidian. And on that throne sat the king. Kael Nightshade was not what Alara had expected. The stories had painted him as a monster, a beast in human form, something to fear and flee from. The man before her was beautiful in a way that made her chest tight and her breath catch. He was massive. Had to be close to 7 feet tall, even seated with shoulders broad enough to block doorways. Dark hair fell in waves past his jaw, framing features that were sharp and strong and intense. Scars marked his face and hands, evidence of battles fought and survived. But it was his eyes that stopped her completely. Gold, bright and burning and focused entirely on her with an intensity that felt like being caught in the full force of the sun. The moment their gazes met, something inside Alara's chest snapped into place with an almost audible click. The mate bond. It slammed into her like a physical blow. Heat cascaded through her body in waves she couldn't control. Her wolf, which had been dormant and quiet her entire life, suddenly roared to life with a recognition that shook her to her core. Mate, mate, mate. Alara's knees buckled. She would have fallen if Helen hadn't caught her arm. On the throne, Kael had gone completely still. His hands gripped the armrest hard enough that she could hear stone cracking. His eyes blazed brighter, and she could see his chest heaving with the effort of breathing. He felt it too. The bond completing its circuit. Alpha meeting Omega. 2 halves of a whole clicking into place after 200 years of searching. "Everyone out," he said. His voice was rough, barely controlled. "Now, Tuam." Helen hesitated. "That includes you, Helen. I won't hurt here, but I need everyone else gone. Right now." The healer looked at Alara silently, asking permission. Alara managed a tiny nod, even though she wasn't sure it was the truth. The throne room emptied in seconds. Doors closed, locks turned, And then there were just the two of them. Kale stood. The movement was fluid, despite his size predatory grace that made it clear he was every inch the warrior king the stories claimed. He descended the steps from his throne slowly. Each footfall echoed in the empty space. Each step brought him closer to where Alara stood, frozen in the center of the room. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his massive body, close enough to see the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides, as if he was holding himself back from reaching for her. "You're real," he said quietly, the same words he'd whispered at her bedside. "I thought maybe I dreamed you. Imagine the bond because I wanted it so desperately." Alara forced herself to speak even though her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I don't want this. I don't want to be anyone's mate, fated or not." Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or understanding. "I know," he said. "You were sold to me like property, abandoned by guards who should have protected you, nearly died alone in a blizzard. You have every right to hate me, to reject this bond and demand to be released." He took a step back, giving her space. "I won't force you, won't use my authority as king or my strength as alpha to make you submit. The bond is there and neither of us can change that. But how we respond to it is still our choice." He gestured to the throne room around them. "You're free to leave if you want. I'll provide you with supplies and guards and enough gold to start a new life anywhere in the territories. You'll have my protection, but not my claim. You can walk out of this palace and never see me again." Alara stared at him shocked. This was not what she'd expected. Not even close. "But," he continued, and now his voice dropped to something almost pleading, "I'm asking you to stay. Not as a prisoner, not as tribute, but as a guest. Give me 1 month, 30 days to prove that I'm not the monster the stories made me out to be. To show you what life here could be like. And at the end of that month, if you still want to leave, I'll let you go." "Why?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it. "Why does it matter what I want? You're a king. You could just take what you want." Kale's expression turned fierce. "Because I've lived 250 years, and I've learned that anything taken by force turns to poison. I've watched kings and alphas claim mates against their will and seen those bonds destroy both parties. I won't do that. Not to you, not to anyone." He held out his hand, palm up, an offering, not a demand. 1 month, Alara Moonstone. Give me 1 month to earn what I hope will be freely given." She looked at his hand, looked at his face, at the sincerity in those burning gold eyes. She thought about the pack that had sold her, about the village that had thrown stones at her in the square, about the elders who had called her worthless and broken. She thought about the old woman who had pressed a scrap of cloth into her hands and told her she was stronger than they knew. She thought about surviving a blizzard that killed grown warriors, about walking 30 miles through snow to reach a palace she'd expected to be her tomb. She'd survived all of that. She could survive 1 month with a king who promised not to hurt her. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness. His skin was warm and calloused and sent sparks racing up her arm. 1 month, she agreed. The smile that broke across his face was radiant enough to steal her breath. The month that followed was unlike anything Alara had ever experienced. Kale kept his word. She was not a prisoner, but a guest. Given chamber that were larger than the house she'd grown up in. Given clothing finer than anything she'd ever imagined. Given freedom to go anywhere in the palace she wished. She spent her days in the healer's wing. Helen welcomed her help, and Alara discovered that palace medicine was far more advanced than anything her mother had taught her. She learned new techniques, new remedies, new ways to combine herbs and magic to create healing that bordered on miraculous. She was good at it, better than good. The other healers began seeking her opinion on difficult cases, began asking her to assist with procedures that required a delicate touch and steady hands. For the first time in her life, Alara felt useful, valued, like she had a purpose beyond just surviving. And Kyle watched. He didn't intrude, didn't demand her time or attention, but she would catch glimpses of him in hallways, see him in the courtyard when she walked through on her way to gather herbs. He would nod at her, smile, and then move on, giving her the space he'd promised. But 3 weeks into her month, everything changed. Lady Vivian arrived at court. She was everything Alara was not. Tall, easily 6 feet. Beautiful in a way that made other people stop and stare. Auburn hair that fell in perfect waves down her back. Green eyes that sparkled with intelligence and confidence. And she was an alpha female. Rare and powerful and perfectly matched to a king. Alara saw the way Vivian looked at Kale, saw the possessive gleam in her eyes, the way she angled herself to be in his line of sight at all times. She heard the whispers, too, from servants and courtiers and guards who didn't bother to lower their voices when she passed. The king can't seriously be considering that tiny Omega. Lady Vivian would give him strong heirs. An alpha female and an alpha male. That's a proper match. Not this broken little thing he dragged in from the snow. The words stung, but Alara had heard worse, had survived worse. What she couldn't survive was the day Vivian cornered her in the healer's wing. Alara was grinding herbs when she felt the shift in the air, the sudden oppressive weight of an alpha's presence. She turned to find Vivian standing in the doorway blocking her exit. "So, you're the famous Alara Moonstone?" Vivian's voice was silk over steel. "The little Omega who survived a blizzard and stole the king's attention." "I didn't steal anything," Alara said quietly. "I'm just a guest here." "A guest?" Vivian laughed. "Is that what he's calling you? How sweet." She stepped into the room and Alara felt the power radiating from her like heat from a forge. "Let me explain something to you, little Omega. Kael Nightshade is a king. He needs a queen who can stand beside him, who can fight beside him, who can give him heirs strong enough to inherit his crown." She leaned closer and Alara forced herself not to back away. "You can't even shift. You're weak, broken, worthless. Whatever interest he has in you will fade the moment he remembers what he really needs. And when it does, I'll be there to give him everything you can't." The words were designed to cut, to wound, to remind Alara of every insult she'd ever heard, every judgment, every dismissal. But they also made her angry. "If you're so perfect," Alara heard herself say, "why has he spent the last month with me instead of you?" Vivian's expression turned glacial. "Enjoy it while it lasts, little Omega. Your month is almost up, and when it is, you'll go back to being nobody, and Kael will finally remember what a real queen looks like." She swept out of the room, leaving Alara shaking with a combination of fear and fury and something else she couldn't quite name. That evening, Kael invited her to dine with him. It was the first time he'd requested her company directly. Alara almost refused, still rattled from her encounter with Vivian, but curiosity won out over caution. They ate in a private chamber overlooking the mountains. The food was exquisite, the wine was smooth, and Kael was surprisingly easy to talk to. He asked her about her work in the healer's wing, about the techniques she was learning, about her mother and the knowledge she'd passed down. Alara found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, telling him about her childhood, about losing her parents, about the pack that had never valued her. "They were wrong," Kael said quietly when she finished. "About you being worthless. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, Alara. To survive what you survived and still have kindness in your heart, compassion in your healing. That takes more strength than any warrior I know." The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache. "Lady Vivian doesn't think so," she said before she could stop herself. Something dangerous flashed in Kael's eyes. "What did she say to you?" "Nothing that wasn't true. I'm small. I can't shift. I'm not the kind of queen a king needs." Kael set down his wineglass with enough force that it cracked. "You are exactly the kind of queen I need," he said, his voice vibrating with barely controlled intensity. "Vivian is ambitious and powerful, and would make a fine political match. But she's not my mate. She's not you." He stood and crossed to where Alara sat, dropped to one knee so their eyes were level. "Your month is almost up," he said. 3 more days. "And I promised I would let you leave if that's what you wanted. But before you decide, I need you to know something." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face in his hands with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "I have waited 250 years for you. Not for an Omega, not for a queen, for you. For the person who would make me feel alive again after centuries of existing. And I have fallen in love with you, Alara Moonstone, with your strength and your kindness, in the way you care for people, even when they don't deserve it." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones. "I'm not asking you to love me back. Not yet. But I'm asking you to give us a chance, to stay. Not as my prisoner or my tribute, but as my mate, my partner, my equal." Alara's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. I don't know if I can be what you need. You already are. The curse, we'll face it together or we won't face it at all, your choice. But Alara, please, please stay." She looked into his eyes, saw 250 years of loneliness looking back at her, saw hope and fear and desperate longing all mixed together. And she saw something else, something that looked like the future she'd never dared to dream of. Okay, she breathed. I'll stay. When the kiss happened so slowly she could have stopped it at any moment. Kale leaned in, gave her time to pull back to say no to change her mind. When she didn't, when she tilted her face up toward his, instead he closed the final distance between them. His lips were soft against hers, gentle, reverent, like she was something precious that might break if he wasn't careful. Alara had never been kissed before, had never wanted to be, but this felt like coming home, like finding a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kale rested his forehead against hers. Tell me you mean it, he whispered. Tell me this is real. It's real, she promised. I'm staying. The smile that broke across his face was beautiful and fierce and full of joy. Then you should know, he said, his voice dropping to something darker, more intimate, that you're about to go into heat. I can smell it starting. It'll hit you within the hour. Alara's eyes widened. She could feel it now that he'd mentioned it. The warmth building low in her belly, the way her skin was becoming more sensitive. The pull toward him getting stronger with every passing second. I've never, she started. I know. His hands moved to her shoulders, steadying her. And we don't have to do anything you're not ready for. I can leave. Can have Helen stay with you through it. But even as he said it, Alara was shaking her head. No, she said. Don't leave. Please don't leave. His eyes blazed bright enough to light the room. Are you sure? I'm terrified, she admitted, but I'm sure. I want this. I want you. Then I've got you, he promised. I'll take care of you. I'll be gentle. You're safe with me, little one. Always. The heat hit her like a wave. One moment she was standing, the next she was in Kael's arms as her legs gave out beneath her. He carried her to his chambers, laid her on a bed softer than clouds. And when the need became too much to bear, when she was crying with the overwhelming sensation of it all, he kept his promise. He was gentle, patient, worshipful. He made sure she felt nothing but pleasure, even as the bond between them cemented into something unbreakable. And when it was over, when they lay tangled together in the aftermath, both breathing hard and marked by each other's claiming, Alara felt tears streaming down her face. Not from pain, not from fear, from relief, from joy, from the overwhelming realization that for the first time in her 19 years, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Kale gathered her close, pressing kisses to her hair, her forehead, her tear-stained cheeks. I love you, he whispered again. My mate, my queen. Mine. Yours, Allura agreed, her voice thick with emotion. I'm yours. She fell asleep in his arms, feeling safer than she had ever felt in her life, and dreamed of golden eyes and silver crowns and a future that suddenly seemed possible. But as dawn broke over the palace, as Alara slept wrapped in the warmth of her new mate, she didn't hear the conversation happening in the throne room below. Didn't hear Kael speaking with his most trusted advisor in the pre-dawn darkness. The elders from her pack sent word, the advisor said. They want to know if the tribute was satisfactory. Kael's expression turned cold. Send word back. Tell them the tribute was received. But make sure they know they sold me my fated mate. They knew what she was to me. Knew it when she was 12 years old. And they traded her like cattle anyway. What do you want done about it? Nothing yet. But when the time comes, Alara will decide their fate, not me. And something tells me her judgment will be far more creative than anything I could devise. The advisor left, and Kael returned to his chambers, to the small Omega sleeping in his bed, and made another silent promise. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they faced, he would make sure she never had to face them alone. She was his queen now, and queens, he had learned, were far more dangerous than anyone ever expected. The morning after the claiming, Alara woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize, and a warmth beside her that made her breath catch. Kael was still asleep. In sleep, he looked younger somehow. The hard lines of command and 2 centuries of responsibility softened into something almost boyish. His arm was draped across her waist, holding her close, even in unconsciousness, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. Alara studied his face in the golden morning light, traced the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, with her eyes not daring to touch and wake him. Counted the smaller scars that marked his hands where they rested against the sheets. 250 years of life, 200 years of curse, 6 mates lost to a fate he couldn't control. And now her. The thought should have terrified her, should have sent her running from this bed in this palace in this impossible situation. Instead, it filled her with something that felt dangerously close to purpose. She slipped carefully from beneath his arm, found a robe of deep blue silk draped across a chair, and wrapped herself in it. Her body ached in unfamiliar ways marked by the claiming, but beneath the soreness was something else. A rightness, a completion. The mate bond hummed between them, even as she moved across the room. She could feel Kyle's presence like a warm weight in her chest, could sense his contentment. In sleep, could almost taste the dreams that played behind his closed eyes. It was overwhelming and intimate and utterly foreign. She found herself drawn to the window. Outside the palace grounds stretched toward mountains still capped with snow. Gardens that would bloom in spring lay dormant under frost. Guards patrolled the walls with military precision, and somewhere beyond those walls was the pack that had sold her. The elders who had known what she was and traded her anyway. The thought made her jaw clench. But before she could spiral into that particular darkness, something else caught her attention. A tingling sensation in her left shoulder. Not painful exactly, but insistent, like something waking up after a long sleep. Alara pulled the robe down off her shoulder and turned to look in the mirror. She froze. There on her shoulder blade was a mark she'd never seen before. Silver lines that seemed to glow faintly in the morning light, forming a pattern of interlocking circles and spirals. It looked like lace made of moonlight, like frost forming on glass, like something ancient and powerful and utterly impossible. Beautiful, isn't it? Ilara spun around. Kael was awake, propped up on one elbow, watching her with those burning gold eyes. What is it? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. He rose from the bed, unself-conscious in his nakedness, and crossed to stand behind her. His fingers traced the silver mark with reverent gentleness. A bloodline marker, he said softly. I saw it last night when we... He paused, and she could see his reflection in the mirror, a slight color rising in his cheeks despite everything. I wasn't sure what it meant, but now seeing it in daylight glowing like this, I think I know. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Ilara, I think you're a silver healer. The words hung in the air between them like a pronouncement of fate. A what? A bloodline so rare it's almost myth. Born once every 500 years if the old texts are accurate, silver healers can do things that normal healers can't. Cure diseases, thought incurable. Mend wounds that should be fatal. And most importantly, his voice dropped to something almost reverential. They can break curses. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Alara reached out to steady herself against the window frame, her mind reeling. That's impossible. I'm nobody. I'm just an Omega who can't even shift properly. I can't be. You walked 30 miles through a blizzard that killed grown warriors, Kale interrupted gently. You healed from frostbite that should have cost you your feet in a matter of days. Helen said your recovery was miraculous. Unexplainable. He cupped her face in his hands. You're not nobody, Alara. You never were. The pack that raised you just couldn't see what you were. Or worse, they could see it and feared it. The pieces started falling into place. Her mother, the healer, who had been so much better than anyone else. The way people had whispered about her behind closed doors. The way the elders had watched Alara with something that looked like fear masked as contempt. My mother, she breathed. Was she? Probably. The bloodline passes through the female line. Your mother would have had the gift. She likely taught you what she could while hiding what you were. Ilara's legs gave out. She sank to the floor and Kyle went with her, gathering her into his arms as the implications crashed over her. The elders knew, she whispered. They knew what I was. That's why they sent me to you. Not just because of the mate bond, but because a silver healer is worth more than gold, Kale finished grimly. Worth more than any treaty or peace agreement. They sold you knowing exactly what you could do, what you could be worth to the right buyer. The betrayal cut deeper than anything they'd done before. It was one thing to be sold as tribute, another entirely to be sold as a commodity, a magical artifact in human form. The curse, Alara said suddenly, looking up at Kale. You said silver healers can break curses. Do you think I could? She saw hope flare in his eyes, bright and desperate and terrifying in its intensity. I don't know, he admitted. I've researched for 200 years, consulted every scholar, every mage, every ancient text I could find. The curse on my bloodline is old and powerful, cast by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Who cast it? Kale's expression turned dark. That's a story for another time. But Alara, even if you could break it, I would never ask you to. The risk. What risk? Breaking a curse that powerful requires channeling enormous amounts of magic through your own body. It could kill you, could burn you out from the inside. I won't risk you like that. I'd rather live another 1,000 years alone, than watch you die trying to give me something I've already lost. Alara absorbed this, her mind racing. She had a gift, a power, a purpose that went beyond just surviving. And the man she had claimed as mate, who had claimed her in return, would rather sacrifice his own happiness than risk her life. The realization made her chest ache with something too big to name. Before she could respond, a sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. "Your Majesty?" A guard's voice, urgent and strained. "We have a situation. The council requires your immediate presence." Kale's expression shifted from tender to commanding in an instant. The king replacing the mate with practiced ease. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." He helped Alara to her feet and dressed quickly. Before he left, he pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Stay here. Rest. We'll talk more about this tonight." But something in the guard's tone had set Alara's nerves on edge. Some instinct inherited from her mother's bloodline whispered that this was more than just a council meeting. This was the beginning of something dangerous. She was proven right 3 hours later when Helen burst into Kale's chambers, her face pale and her hands shaking. "You need to come with me," the healer said without preamble. "Now, it's not safe here." "What are you talking about?" "Lady Vivian, she left the palace this morning with a contingent of guards. Kale thought she was returning to her own territory, but I just received word from one of my contacts in the city. She met with someone, a woman in black robes. They were seen entering an abandoned house on the eastern edge." Alara's blood ran cold. "A woman in black robes. A witch, most likely. Alara, I think Vivian knows what you are, and I think she's planning something." Before Alara could respond, the door to the chambers flew open. But it wasn't guards who entered. It was Vivian herself, flanked by 6 men Alara had never seen before. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural red light, and the air around them crackled with dark magic. "Well," Vivian purred, her perfect face twisted into something ugly and cruel. "Isn't this convenient? Saved me the trouble of hunting you down, little Omega." Helen stepped in front of Alara, her stance protective, despite having no weapons. "Whatever you're planning, Vivian, stop now. Kale will—" "Kale will do nothing," Vivian interrupted. "He's currently dealing with a very urgent crisis in the Western Territories. A crisis that I arranged specifically to get him out of the palace. By the time he realizes what's happened, we'll be long gone." She gestured to the men. "Take the healer, make sure she can't alert anyone, and bring me the Omega." What happened next occurred in a blur of motion and violence. Helen tried to fight, managed to get in 2 solid hits before one of the men struck her across the temple. She crumpled to the floor unconscious. Alara screamed and ran for the door. Made it 3 steps before hands like iron bands wrapped around her arms. "Let me go." She tried to pull away. They tried to use the self-defense moves she'd seen guards practicing in the courtyard. But she was small and weak and completely outmatched. One of the men produced a cloth, pressed it over her mouth and nose. Alara struggled, but the smell was sickly sweet and overwhelming. Her vision began to blur. Her limbs went heavy. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Vivian's face, beautiful and terrible and triumphant. "Sleep well, Silver Healer. You have an appointment with someone who's very eager to meet you." Alara woke to pain, not the dull ache of the claiming or the soreness of unused muscles. This was sharp and immediate and radiating from her wrists where thick iron manacles bit into her skin. She was chained to a wall. The room around her was dark, lit only by flickering torches that cast dancing shadows across stone walls slick with moisture. The air smelled of mold and blood and something else, something that made her skin crawl with instinctive revulsion. Dark magic. "Awake at last," a woman's voice, cultured and cold and utterly devoid of warmth. I was beginning to worry that Vivian's men had been too enthusiastic with the sedative. A figure emerged from the shadows. A woman tall and elegant, dressed in robes of deepest black. Her hair was silver. Her eyes were violet, and her face was ageless in a way that suggested she was far older than she appeared. This was the witch. Had to be. "My name is Ravenna," the woman said, circling Alara like a predator, examining prey. "And you, little Omega, are going to help me with something I've been trying to accomplish for a very long time." "I won't help you with anything." Alara managed, her voice hoarse and her throat dry. Ravenna smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Oh, you will. You see that pretty silver mark on your shoulder is exactly what I need to complete a spell I've been crafting for decades. A spell that will allow me to steal your bloodline, your power, your gift." She leaned closer and Alara could see the madness lurking in those violet eyes. "Imagine it, the power of a silver healer at my command. I could rule kingdoms, could hold kings hostage with the promise of cures and curses, could reshape the world to my liking. Kel will come for me, Ilara said, even though fear was making her voice shake. He'll tear this place apart stone by stone to find me. I'm counting on it, Ravenna replied cheerfully. The spell requires three components, you see. The blood of a silver healer, the rage of a cursed alpha, and the despair of a broken bond. She traced a finger down Ilara's cheek with mocking gentleness. You'll provide the first. Your mate will provide the second. And when I kill you in front of him, he'll provide the third. A perfect trifecta. Ilara felt ice spread through her veins. You're insane. Perhaps, but I'm also very, very powerful and very patient. Now shall we begin? The blood extraction is quite painful, I'm afraid, but try to scream quietly. I find the noise so distracting. What followed was agony. Ravenna produced a silver knife blessed and cursed in equal measure and made precise cuts along Ilara's arms. Not deep enough to kill, just deep enough to bleed. The blood that flowed from those cuts glowed faintly silver in the torchlight. It pooled in bowls carved with runes that made Ilara's eyes water to look at. Fascinating, Ravenna murmured, watching the blood with scientific interest. So pure, so powerful. You really have no idea what you are, do you? Ilara gritted her teeth against the pain and refused to answer. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning in that dark room with pain as her only companion. Ravenna worked methodically, collecting blood, chanting in languages Ilara didn't recognize, drawing symbols on the floor that seemed to writhe and pulse with dark life. And through it all, Ilara held on to one thought. Kale would come. He had promised she would never be abandoned again. Promised she was safe. Promised to protect her. He would come. She just had to survive long enough for him to find her. Kale knew something was wrong the moment he stepped back into the palace. The crisis in the Western Territories had been resolved. A manufactured emergency he was realizing now, designed to pull him away from the palace at a specific time. Someone had planned this. He ran to his chambers, already knowing what he would find. The door was open, furniture overturned, signs of struggle, and Helen just waking up on the floor, a massive bruise blooming on her temple. Where is she? His voice came out as a growl that rattled the windows. Where is Ilara? Vivian, Helen gasped, struggling to sit up. She took her. Men with magic. Dark magic. Kale, I tried to stop them. I swear I... He didn't wait to hear more. The rage that filled him was primal, ancient. The fury of an alpha whose mate had been stolen combined with the protective instinct of a king whose people had been violated under his own roof. Guards. His roar brought them running from every corner of the palace. Find Lady Vivian. Find the Omega. Turn over every stone in this kingdom if you have to, but find them. His beta advisor appeared already armed and ready. We tracked Vivian to the Eastern Quarter, an abandoned estate that used to belong to a noble family. Witnesses saw her entering with 6 men and what looked like an unconscious woman. How long ago? 4 hours, Your Majesty. 4 hours. Ilara had been in their hands for 4 hours. The mate bond in his chest was screaming. He could feel her pain, could sense her fear, could taste the blood that was being spilled. His mate's blood was being spilled. Mobilize every available soldier, he commanded, his voice deadly calm. We move now, and anyone who stands between me and my mate dies. No exceptions. No mercy. The assault on the abandoned estate was brutal and efficient. Kale didn't bother with strategy or subtlety. He simply tore through the front doors and killed anything that tried to stop him. Vivian's guards died first. They tried to fight, tried to use their dark magic to slow him down. They failed. Kale in full alpha rage was a force of nature. Unstoppable, merciless, terrifying in his single-minded focus. He found Vivian in a second-floor chamber, trying to flee through a window. Going somewhere, his voice was death itself. She turned her face a mask of terror. Kale, wait, I can explain. He didn't let her finish. One hand closed around her throat and lifted her off the ground. Where is she? Basement, Vivian gasped, clawing at his hand. The old wine cellar. But Kale, you can't. Ravenna will kill her if you interfere. He threw her across the room. She hit the wall with enough force to crack stone and slid to the ground unconscious. Let his guards deal with her. He had more important things to focus on. The basement stairs were narrow and dark. Kale took them 3 at a time, following the pull of the mate bond and the scent of Ilara's blood. He burst through the door at the bottom and stopped cold. Ilara was chained to the far wall, her arms covered in precise cuts that wept silver blood. Her head was bowed, her breathing shallow. But she was alive, and standing between them, smiling like she'd just won a game, was Ravenna. Right on time, the witch purred. I was starting to worry you wouldn't make it for the final act. Kale's eyes glowed bright enough to light the entire room. Release her now, and I might let you live long enough to stand trial. Oh, I don't think so. You see, the spell is almost complete. I have her blood. I have your rage. All I need now is your despair. She produced a dagger, ornate and glowing with dark magic. One strike to her heart, and the silver healer bloodline transfers to me, along with all that delicious power. And you, dear king, get to watch your fated mate die. Again, just like the other six. Must be some kind of record. She raised the dagger. Kale lunged, but he was too far away, too slow. Even with alpha speed, he wouldn't reach Alara in time. He watched in horror as the blade descended, and then something impossible happened. Light exploded from Alara's shoulder, silver light so bright it was blinding. So pure it made Ravanna scream and stumble backward, her dagger clattering to the floor. The chains binding Alara's wrists shattered, not broke, shattered, disintegrating into rust and dust. And Alara stood. Her eyes were glowing silver, her hair seemed to float on an invisible wind, and the mark on her shoulder blazed like a star had been pressed into her skin. You want my power? Her voice echoed with harmonics that made the walls shake. Come and take it. What Kale witnessed next would stay with him for the rest of his very long life. Alara moved like liquid moonlight, faster than should be possible for an Omega, stronger than any wolf he'd ever seen. Ravenna tried to fight back, through dark magic and waves that should have flattened a building. Alara walked through it like it was rain. She reached Ravenna in 3 strides, placed one small hand on the witch's chest, and light poured out of her, silver and pure and absolutely merciless. Ravenna screamed. The dark magic that had sustained her for who knows how many years burned away like fog in sunlight. Her ageless beauty crumbled, revealing the ancient creature beneath. This is what real power looks like, Alara said, her voice still carrying that otherworldly echo. Not stolen, not corrupted, given freely by the moon goddess herself to those who would use it to heal, to protect, to serve. The light intensified. Ravenna's screams cut off. And when the light faded, there was nothing left but dust settling slowly to the floor. Alara swayed. The silver glow in her eyes flickered and went out. She looked down at her hands like she didn't recognize them. Then she looked up and saw Kyle. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know I could. I've never, she collapsed. Kale caught her before she hit the ground, gathering her into his arms and holding her like she was the most precious thing in existence. You're incredible, he breathed against her hair. You're the most incredible person I've ever known. I killed her, Alara said, and he could hear the shock in her voice. I killed someone. You saved yourself, saved me, saved who knows how many others she would have hurt. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. You are not a killer, Alara. You're a protector. There's a difference. She buried her face against his chest and started to cry. Not from pain or fear or trauma, though she had every right to all 3. From relief, from the overwhelming realization that it was over, that she was safe, that they were both safe. Kale carried her out of that dark basement into the morning sunlight. His guards had secured the estate. Vivian was in chains, bleeding and broken, but alive. She would face trial, would answer for her crimes, but that was a problem for later. Right now, all that mattered was getting Alara home and healed and held until the shaking stopped, and she believed, truly believed, that she was safe. They returned to the palace to find it in an uproar. Word had spread about the kidnapping, about the rescue, about the small Omega who had killed a witch with her bare hands. Kale took her straight to his chambers. Let Helen tend to her wounds, stayed by her side every moment, his hand in hers, the mate bond singing between them. As Helen cleaned and bandaged the cuts on Alara's arms, she spoke quietly. The mark has changed. Alara looked at her shoulder. The silver pattern had grown, spread, become something even more intricate and beautiful. What does it mean? It means you've awakened your power fully, Helen said with a small smile. You're not just a silver healer now, you're a sovereign, the first in recorded history. I don't want to be special, Alara whispered. I just want to be normal. Kale squeezed her hand. Normal is overrated, and you, my love, were never meant to be anything less than extraordinary. The trial of Lady Vivian and Elder Whitmore was held 1 week later. Alara had insisted on including the elders from her former pack, had sent guards to bring them to the Northern Palace to answer for their crimes. They arrived in chains, proud men reduced to prisoners just as they had reduced her. The throne room was packed. Every noble, every guard, every servant who could squeeze inside had come to watch. Kale sat on his throne, radiating authority and barely controlled fury. Beside him, in a smaller throne that had been crafted specifically for her, sat Alara. She wore a gown of silver and blue. A circlet of white gold rested on her brow. She looked every inch the queen she was about to become. Elder Whitmore was brought forward first. He kept his eyes on the floor, unable or unwilling to meet her gaze. Elder Whitmore, Kale's voice rang out across the silent room. You stand accused of conspiracy to sell a silver healer to hostile forces, of knowingly endangering a fated mate bond, of betraying the sacred trust placed in you by your pack. He paused. However, the judgment is not mine to make. The crime was committed against my mate. Therefore, she will decide your fate. All eyes turned to Alara. She stood slowly, descended the steps from the dais, approached the elder who had sold her like cattle. You knew, she said quietly. You knew what I was when I was 12 years old. You knew I was fated to be the king's mate. You knew my bloodline. And you used that knowledge to broker a deal that benefited your pack while selling me to the highest bidder. Whitmore flinched. Did you ever think about what that would mean for me? Did you care? Or was I just another resource to be exploited? We did what we had to do to survive. Whitmore said, his voice rough. The war was over. We had nothing left. You were our only bargaining chip. I was a child. Alara shot back, her voice sharp as glass. A child you watched grow up. A child you promised to protect after my parents died. And you sold me. She turned to address the assembled crowd. I could have them executed. The law would support it. The people would probably celebrate it. She looked back at Whitmore. But I won't. Because I am not you. I will not become the thing I hate. She raised her voice so everyone could hear. Elder Whitmore and his co-conspirators are hereby stripped of their titles and positions. All assets will be seized and redistributed to fund Omega education and protection programs throughout the territories. They will be exiled as rogues with no pack to call home, no status to claim, and no protection under the law. She leaned closer to Whitmore. You made me feel worthless my entire life. Now you'll know what that feels like. And you'll live with the knowledge that the girl you called broken and useless became a queen who showed you more mercy than you ever showed her. Guards dragged the elders away. Whitmore looked back, once his expression a mixture of shame and regret. Alara turned away and returned to her throne, where Kyle waited with pride shining in his golden eyes. That evening, alone in their chambers, Alara finally told Kyle what she had discovered 3 days ago. I'm pregnant. He froze, completely and utterly still. For a long moment, he didn't even seem to breathe. What? I'm pregnant, about 2 weeks along. And before you panic, the baby's healthy. Strong, the curse isn't affecting it. Kale's eyes blazed bright enough to light the entire room. Are you sure, Alara? If something happens, if the curse... She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. Feel for yourself. He closed his eyes, let his senses extend, and she watched as wonder and joy and terror all crossed his face in rapid succession. There's a heartbeat, he breathed. I can hear it. It's so small, but it's there and it's strong. And his voice broke. She had never seen him cry before. Had never imagined that a king who had lived for 2.5 centuries could be brought to tears. But he was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face as he held his hand against her stomach and felt the impossible life growing there. We're going to have a baby, he whispered. We're going to have a baby, she confirmed. He pulled her into his arms and held her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. Thank you, he said against her hair. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being brave enough to love me. Thank you for giving me everything I thought I'd lost forever. We did it together, Alara replied. Everything we've done together, and we'll keep doing it together. Together, he agreed. The coronation took place 2 months later, when Alara was just starting to show. The entire kingdom gathered to watch as Kael placed a crown of silver on her head and declared her his queen before the assembled masses. She wore white and silver, her hair was braided with moonstones, and the mark on her shoulder glowed softly through the sheer fabric of her gown. Alara Moonstone Nightshade, Kael proclaimed, his voice carrying across the crowd, Queen of the Northern Territories, Silver Healer, Sovereign, my mate, my partner, my equal. The crowd erupted in cheers. And Alara, who had once been called worthless and broken and useless, stood before thousands of wolves and accepted a crown she had earned not through birthright, but through sheer stubborn survival. That night, as they celebrated in the Great Hall, she felt the baby kick for the first time. Kael felt it too. His hand had been resting on her stomach all evening, protective and possessive and tender. When he felt that first flutter of movement, he looked at her with such joy that it took her breath away. Hello, little one, he whispered to her belly. We can't wait to meet you. 7 months later, on a spring morning when the gardens were in full bloom, Alara went into labor. It was long and difficult and painful in ways that no amount of healing magic could completely prevent. But it was also natural, normal, exactly what it should be. No curse, no dark magic. No fear that this child would be taken from them before they could even hold it. Kale stayed by her side through every contraction, every scream, every moment when she was certain she couldn't do this. "You can," he would say. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this." And she did. After 14 hours of labor, their daughter entered the world with a cry that rattled the windows and announced to everyone within earshot that she was alive and healthy and ready to make her presence known. They named her Serafina. She had her mother's white gold hair and her father's golden eyes. She was perfect and tiny and completely unbothered by the fact that her existence had just broken a 200-year curse and rewritten the laws of magic in the process. Kale held his daughter for the first time with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face. "She's real," he kept saying. "She's here. She's alive and healthy and real." Ilara, exhausted and aching and absolutely radiant, watched her mate fall in love with their daughter and felt her heart might burst from the sheer weight of happiness. They had done it. Against all odds, against curse and betrayal and dark magic and every force that had tried to tear them apart, they had built something beautiful. A family, a future, a life worth living. In the months that followed, Alara threw herself into the reforms she had promised. Omega protection laws were strengthened. Schools were established. Healers were trained. The weakest members of society were given voices and protection and opportunities they had never had before. And through it all, Serafina grew, a happy baby, content and curious, showing signs already of inheriting both her mother's healing gift and her father's strength. On Serafina's first birthday, they held a celebration that the kingdom would talk about for decades. But the best moment came late that night after the guests had left and the decorations had been taken down. Ilara stood on the balcony of their chambers, holding her sleeping daughter and looking out over the kingdom that had become her home. Kale joined her, wrapping his arms around both of them. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. "About how far I've come," Ilara replied. "About the girl who arrived here in chains expecting death. About how that girl never could have imagined this. Any of this." She looked up at him. "About how the worst day of my life led me to the best days of my life. About how sometimes the things we think will destroy us actually save us." Kale pressed a kiss to her temple. "You saved yourself, Alara. I just gave you a place to land." "No," she said firmly. "We saved each other. That's what partners do." Below them, the kingdom slept peacefully, protected by laws that Alara had written, healed by reforms she had championed, made better by a queen who had refused to let her past define her future. And in that moment, holding her daughter and wrapped in her mate's arms, Alara felt something she had never truly felt before. Complete. Not despite everything she had survived, but because of it. She had come to this palace expecting chains. Instead, she had found a crown. And she wore it not as a burden, but as a reminder. That strength comes in many forms. That healing is more powerful than hurting. That love, real love, transforms everything it touches. And that queens are not born, they are forged in fire and ice and blood and tears and stubborn, unbreakable determination to survive. She had survived, and now finally she was living.